Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Again to part deux, which is two in French for Dennis. Uh, part deux of personal biblical finance. And just a reminder, the goal here is to add a biblical lens through which to look at how we run our personal finances. And I shared quite a few quotes last Sunday. I have a few more, but fewer this time. We're going to get more practical into the meat of the topic here. I do want to kick off with wrapping up the tithing section, because there's still a few more things I wanted to talk about. And from some of the feedback I got, I heard that was rather convicting, so I'm going to keep pressing on tithing, because I think it's one of the most important things when it comes to personal finances through a biblical lens and giving back to God what was His to begin with. So just a reminder, I'm not a financial professional. I'm not a tax advisor. I highly recommend that you go talk to a tax advisor or your accountant, somebody to confirm, because everybody's situation is slightly different. The deductibility of some of the things, if you're a self-employed, if you have your own company, if you're an employee, if you're retired, your tax situation will be different. And so take what I say with a grain of salt, go validate it, go confirm it, and make sure that the math works for you. And tax laws change. There are some new tax laws that kicked in 2025 for 26 taxes that you'll pay for this year, as well as some laws that kicked in earlier this year that are retroactive. So lots of things and pieces that are in flight that I encourage you to go double check with your accountant or the tax advisor. And you can find, whether it's H&R Block, which I assume there's some of those here in Santa Fe, they're usually pretty good about taxes and tax setup. So let me get to, oh, hang on, so this didn't, there we go. Okay, so we're gonna go back through this cycle here. I'm gonna skip to where we left off last time. And for some reason it's showing all my slides. I just wanted to show a subset of it. Give me 1 second. Oh, hang on, you know why? Is this showing, this is showing the slide number 1. Can you go to slide number, the set number 2? There we go. No, hang on, the second file that we put up there? There we go. Yep, that's the one. Perfect. Because I changed a few slides here and there. Very good. So I did want to make one correction. The quote, this is often misquoted from the Bible in 1 Timothy. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And it's not the root of all kinds of evil, which I think is an interesting, subtle difference, which Jennifer pointed out to me. And it's probably one of the most misquoted verses from the Bible. It's one of many sources of evil. It's not the only source, and money in and of itself, as we talked about, is just a tool that the devil uses. In and of itself, it's not evil, but it can become evil when it's put to bad use through the devil, and can be also a wonderful thing when put to God's glory. But it's one of the many kinds of evil. So I just wanted to make sure the quote was precise, and you can go check it out in 1 Timothy. Another topic that I wanted to where is this? Is this coming up here? Are we still on the right slide there? For some reason it's not, hang on. Let me just find my right slide here, because apparently it's not coming up the way I wanted it to. One second. Slide 9. There we go. Back to. I mentioned the importance of getting a job, having income, and it is godly to work and to have income. But one of the things, and Pastor Frank mentioned this, working regularly on Sundays is not an excuse not to come to church. And some people, whether they're first responders, some people sometimes, occasionally have to work on Sundays, but getting a job that systematically employs you on Sundays is probably not the right job if you're a Christian. And the quote here from Hebrews is, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. And I think it's important for us to prioritize coming to church And if you have a job, well, make it Sunday afternoon, not Sunday morning, or make it any other day of the week. But it is biblical to come to your local church, and it isn't to skip it every single Sunday because of work. Probably need to find a different job or change, shifts or hours or whatever as best possible. Occasionally, yes. I mean, I know myself, sometimes I have to travel on Sundays to catch the right flight to get somewhere, but that should be the exception. We should be in church 95%, 99%, if not 100% of the time. So I thought that was an important point to make. So we've talked about income and talked about tithing, and tithing is indeed in the Bible. We talked about 10%. Quite a few people came up to me and said, okay, where should I start? And 10% is a great place to start. I do want to go to this quote and actually read it from Malachi, because I think it really hit us, Jennifer and I, really hard. Malachi 3, will man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In your tithes and contributions. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing until there is no more need. And this, for me, really strikes me as probably one of the most important tithing verses in the entire Bible, is who are you stealing from? Are you stealing from God? Are you giving what God commands you to give? And the thought of robbing our Creator is kind of frightening. So I just thought it was important to read this out loud, because I know I flashed it up pretty quickly last time, and some of you had never seen this quote. Some of you didn't know if it was Micah or Malachi, whatever. So it's Malachi 3, 8 through 10. So I encourage you to highlight that one and maybe print it out and put it inside your wallet. Just to remind you of who it belongs to in the beginning, and are we trying to get away with stealing from God? So, tithing. We talked about giving even when you're not here. So if, with the holiday season coming up, Thanksgiving, Christmas, some summer vacation you may have had, if you haven't already done the homework assignment from last Sunday, go back and count how many Sundays you missed that you didn't tithe, and anticipate the ones that you are going to miss and tithe ahead of time. So that's just some of the math I encourage you to do is, even though we may be on vacation, the pastor isn't, the church costs aren't, and this I think is one of the most important things, to tithe throughout the entire year. And just because your calendar may be different from the church's calendar doesn't mean that the tithing calendar shouldn't be yours as well. So I would encourage you to just go back, look at your calendar, what Sundays did you miss? Look at what checks you wrote or Venmos or PayPals you sent, and if you skipped some, catch up. I think that's important to just do the math, and then for next year, make sure you're disciplined about every single Sunday and making up any missed Sundays. If you did some of the homework also and went back and looked at what would 10% look like, and what is sacrificial giving for me, if you realize there was a gap between what you've given so far this year and what you feel you probably should have given more sacrificially, you still have 2.5 months left in the year. So I encourage you to bump up your tithing every Sunday from now until the end of the year. Use this as the catch-up opportunity to make up for that. And if you get a raise, or if you got a raise but didn't change your tithing, if you got a bonus and didn't tithe on that, if you sold a property and made some money off of that, you don't want to be Ananias and Sapphira. You want to make sure that if you sold it, you also prayerfully consider tithing on the proceeds from that. If you got a new job and there's some new income coming in, same thing. You want to make sure that you catch up. Tithing moves with inflation because our pastor's costs and the building costs all move with inflation, but tithing should also move commensurate with your income. And you don't kind of stay flat for, decide you're going to give a certain amount for the rest of your life. And depending on your tax situation, some of this is deductible. So here again, I encourage you to go talk to your tax advisor, see how your taxes add up. Depending on certain income levels, depending on how you do certain deductions, it is more or less deductible. So I encourage you to go double check that. Whether it is or not is almost secondary. That's kind of the tax benefit. Ultimately, tithing on your gross income is the most important thing. Whether it's deductible, that's more the tax laws and not God's law. But in some cases, you can get a tax benefit from it. I encourage you to at least explore if you can benefit from that. What I'd like to challenge you with, as I wrap up here the chapter on tithing, if you're giving $5 a week, could you start giving 10 or 15 starting today? If you're giving $200 a week, what's $250 or $300? Can you sacrificially give that extra little nudge? If you did the math since last Sunday and it added up to 5%, well, could you bump it up to 7 or 10? Or if you're already at 10, the Bible doesn't say stop at 10. It says 10's a good place to start. It's not mandatory, that's Old Testament, but if you're already at 10, could you do 12 or 15? But this is my challenge to you, is push to give sacrificially and generously. And kind of go do the math. You have to go sit down and see what can you not only afford, but what can you sacrificially afford to give. And challenge yourself. If it's $5, you can put in 10, skip that Frappuccino pumpkin spice latte thing. But that for me is some of the things I know Jennifer and I have gone through every year is, could we bump it up 1%? Could we bump it up 5%? On maybe an increasing salary, or there's a bonus, or we sell something. But try and see if you can increase not only the dollar amount, but the percentage, because then that compounds for the benefit of the church. Tithing is one of the important elements of budgeting. And we'll talk about budgeting as something I think everybody should do. You should have a budget. You should know what your income is, and you should budget the tithing and then the rest of your expenses. But if you don't budget it, it's kind of an afterthought. And in my mind, it needs to be an integral part of your personal finances. Is you write down, here's how much money I made, income, salary, retirement, pension, whatever. And then the next line item should be tithing, and you should put a number there. And then do the math for the rest of your budget. But if you don't consciously include it as one of the line items, it tends to be overlooked. It's a budget line item, and you should have that as part of your family, whether it's monthly, annual, whatever type of budget you have. You should plan for it for the remainder of the year, but also for 2026. Another thing I encourage you to do is to set up auto pay or kind of some kind of automatic withdrawal, so it doesn't depend on your presence here and you remembering to put the check in the box. So you can do it we have PayPal. Do we have Venmo? Not yet, but you can automate. You can also do a wire from your account. There are different ways to fire and forget. And I think that's one of the best ways to do it, or put it in your calendar. At a minimum, put it on the calendar on Sunday mornings. You hopefully have church there, but also put tithing to remind you to write that check before you leave home, or write it when you get here, or at the end of service, a reminder in your calendar that pops up on your phone and says, don't forget to tithe as you walk out. So just getting in that habit and making it a recurring theme. If you can automate it, even better. I know Jennifer and I, we just automate it. That way it just shows up in the church's accounts, and I see it show up on my statement, but I don't have to worry about, am I traveling, am I missing a Sunday? It just happens automatically. And I think that's one of the best things you can do, is don't make God a secondary thought, but make the tithing a secondary thought. So it happens automatically, and then update it as you need to. Yes, Henry.
I was going to say, if you do it on auto pay, what if you get an increase in salary?
So you go adjust it. So you go back, and if you set it up on PayPal, for example, you can go and edit that automatic recurring monthly payment that you make. So let's say you're putting in $100 a week, and all of a sudden you get a salary increase, and you're like, oh, I could probably put in 125. You just go and edit it and say, instead of 100 a week, I want it to be 125. And then from then on, it'll set it. But yeah, you have to remember, if you automate it, to go back and adjust it, right? But that's an important thing, is that it should be a reflex. Is I got more money, I should tithe more.
I wanted to ask you too, at the end of the year, you get money back from your taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Should you tithe on that?
I would say yes. Because that's technically it's income, right? Instead of giving it to Uncle Sam, and we all owe something to Uncle Sam at some point or another, but if Uncle Sam gives you some money back, you should probably tithe on that. Tithe on the tax refund you get. And then the rest you can invest in retirement and savings and paying down things. But absolutely, I think it should be part of the consideration. It's not mandatory. None of this is mandatory, but it's biblical to certainly consider any extra income, an inheritance, for example, or you win the lottery. I don't recommend you play the lottery, but if you happen to win the lottery, you should. You should tithe on that, including tax refunds. Absolutely. So just make it systematic every Sunday or once a month, whatever your setup is, whatever your cash flow, but think about it every Sunday. We don't talk about it at the pulpit. It's not mentioned in the announcements. It's not mentioned in the closing benediction. The box is right there. Some churches are a little bit more, in your face about it. But I think we should still always have it in the back of our mind and maybe in the front of our mind. As we leave the service, give back to God and make sure we pay for our pastor who is up here almost every single Sunday. So bump it up to your point. If you have it automated, just make sure you go back in and change it. Similar to retirement, if you have an automated IRA withdrawal, well, the IRA numbers go up, like how much you're allowed to contribute goes up almost every year. Well, every year should go in and adjust it. So it's no different with tithing, is adjusting it every single time there's some event that happens. Talk to your tax advisor, but most of the time you have the opportunity to write things off. It may or may not have an impact on your final tax bill, but that's one thing you'll get from Brenda. You'll get a letter that says you donated this much to the church. Make sure that number corresponds to the number you thought you gave. That's always an important thing. I know I send out those letters to my church back in New York City, and I ask people, does this match your number? Sometimes I may have missed something, because the church back in New York has Venmo, PayPal, cash, and wires. So there are all kinds of sources, and sometimes somebody may have missed something. I know Brenda's very, very good about it. But just in case, just double check, does it match your records to what you gave to the church? And then submit that letter, keep a copy of it, but submit that letter to your tax advisor so that they can see what is deductible or what isn't. So think always, what comes first, God's work and our pastor, or Starbucks and the IRS. You should still pay the IRS whatever you owe them, but you're legally allowed to try and minimize, through all legal means, your taxes. And tithing is one method potentially to reduce your taxes and to give it to the better party versus Uncle Sam. Okay, that's on tithing. Any questions on tithing? I really encourage you to go back and do some homework and sharpen your pencil and go look at how much have you given and what should you, in your prayerfully considered mind, what should you give? And hopefully Brenda will report that giving has gone up since last Sunday. I don't know. Like, it better. Otherwise, Ananias, Sapphira, I don't know. Bad things happen. It better. But I think all joking aside, as a treasurer for our old church in New York, it was important for me to see, was there an inflection point? Not only with new membership, when people got a new job and you heard about it, but do talks like these actually change your heart and your mind? And do we see not just a temporary one Sunday increase, but is it sustained? And I think that's part of my exhortation here, is for you to sustain that as much as possible. So let's talk about expenses. And I put expenses into 3 categories, and you can get more sophisticated, but they're kind of the category of obligations, things you have to pay. Taxes, can't get away with it. Now you can reduce them, but at some point you still have to pay taxes. Mortgage, if you have a mortgage or rent, you kind of have to pay the mortgage, otherwise the bank's going to repossess the home or the apartment. Credit card interest, you have to pay that, or they come after you. So there's some obligations, things you just absolutely cannot get away with not paying, or somebody will come after you. Then there's the basic needs, rent, and that's something we'll talk about. I put it in this category of needs. You can change your rent. Once you've locked in a mortgage, you're kind of stuck with your mortgage. Rent, you can move apartments, you can move houses, you can find a cheaper place. Food, you have to put food on the table, but there are different choices we can make there, but you kind of have to feed yourself and your family. And then there's the category of wants, kind of the fun part, travel, vacation, clothes, fun, whatever, entertainment. But these are kind of the various categories. And it's very important as you design a budget, you have your income, your salary, your pension, you have tithing, and then the next category is, what do I have to pay just to stay out of jail, not get in trouble with the IRS, keep the bank off my back, and then put a roof over my head, food on the table, and then what's left over that I want to spend on. So those are important categories to think of. And if you aren't looking at your expenses through these lenses, I would encourage you to do that. As you budget, You pull out a spreadsheet. I'll talk about some other tools you can use, but categorizing where your expenses are into the, I have to pay this, I kind of want to pay this, and this is the fun part. And if you don't have those buckets, your expenses are probably all over the map. And having control of where your money is going is vitally important when it comes to having fewer expenses than your income, right? That's kind of the key. The math is make more money than you spend. And if you don't know where you're spending it, you're probably flying blind. So having these buckets, I think, are particularly important. Budget essentially means having a plan. And I don't know, by show of hand, how many of you actually have an annual budget? Okay. You need a budget for next year. That's my strong advice, is sit down, spend the time. It might feel a little, bureaucratic and dreary, et cetera, but if you don't have a roadmap, you don't know where you're going to go. And if you don't manage your money with a budget, you probably are not going to be in control of your finances. And a budget doesn't have to be complicated. I'll give you some examples here. And I'm happy to spend time with you. I've done it with both of our boys, for example, our sons, who starting their early career, and sitting down and just a little spreadsheet on Excel and saying, well, how much are you making? What is the rent? What's the car payment? How much is gas every month? How much is car insurance? Just the things that you can't get away without paying. And then figuring out, okay, how much extra money do I have left over? But actually having a spreadsheet and then tracking it. And if you don't have a budget, get one for 2026. Design one for yourself. And you can do it on a piece of paper. If you have a computer, better do it on a computer because you can play around with it and then track. But companies have a budget. Remember last time the analogy I gave, which is the company of you is no different than a real company. And every company in the world has a budget. They have to have a budget. Right? Mark, I know you're a CFO, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I've been living in the business world forever. You always have an annual budget. And then you track, are you on that budget or not? Now, I know the word budget sounds complicated, et cetera. It's not that complicated. It's literally just tracking where your money comes from and where it's going, right? Another way to think of a budget is if you have the last 10 months, since we're in October, the last 10 months of all of your income and your expenses, that gives you a great history of where your money's been going. So credit card statements, bank statements, paychecks. Spend the time to get all those together and kind of pull them together and say, well, the last 10 months I've made this much money, I've tied this much, so on average every month I've given this much, I've spent this much on rent or mortgage and car, et cetera. That gives you some history, because it's hard to make a budget if you don't have a little bit of an idea of where you're starting from. So I would encourage you, don't just take 1 month. If you can take the last 9 or 10 months, you have all of 2025, or most of 2025, that's a great starting place. Figure out what's your monthly line items. How much money do you make every month? How much do you spend? How much do you tithe? How much is rent or mortgage or car? All these things. And you can say, okay, for 2026, what's going to change? Well, I'm going to make a little bit more money because I got a raise. I'm going to tithe a little bit more because Mark stood up here and told me to. Joking. God should convict you to give more, not me. My rent went up. I paid off my car, so I don't have that anymore. I'm still going to pay for gas and all these things, and project what 2026 is going to look like. That's the exercise that you should do here in the next few weeks, is go write a budget for yourself for next year. Reducing expenses. If you spend more than you have, you're going to go bankrupt or tap into your savings and burn through those. So being aware of your expenses is the first step to understanding where can you throttle up or throttle down where you're spending money. Where is it leaking, right? And understanding, I'm spending too much on this, or boy, I'm wasting a lot of money on this category of activities. So being aware of where you're spending the money and living within your means, which is also very biblical. You don't want to accumulate debt and overspend and go out of business or owe a ton of money to a lot of people. Delayed gratification, having the patience for that thing that you want. You want that new car, you want that great vacation, you want that fancy dinner. Yes, but it has to be within your means. You have to be able to afford it. And sometimes that means delaying that fun, delaying that gratification until you have enough. And you can save the money for that special vacation, for that car, for paying off the home, whatever that thing you want to do, but just spending willy-nilly every month means you're probably out of control on your expenses, and that will lead to ruin at some point. Making choices. They could be anything from how you spend your money and your time and your health, but having a change of behavior. If your finances are out of control, you need to change something. And thinking of where can I cut something off? Where can I change this bad habit? Where can I curb this temptation that I have to spend the money on? Gambling is a perfect example. By the way, you should tithe if you do gamble. I don't recommend that you do, but you should tithe on gambling earnings. But don't. But you have to think of your personal finances just like a company. If a company is about to go out of business, they have to change their behavior. They have to do something different. And it's the same for you, the company of you. If you don't change behavior, the outcome will not change. It probably will lead to some financial ruin. And understanding what kind of life do you want to have, maybe not today, but in the future, and what's your burn rate? How much cash is actually leaving your bank account and burning a hole through your pocket because it's more than what you're making? And you're burning through savings, or you're not saving for retirement, which is a good investment, a good expense, is to put that money aside and not spend it now. We'll talk about retirement later. But these are the lenses through which I encourage you to think through expenses. And if you don't know what your expenses are, it's hard to change it. So start by understanding where your money is going, and then think of what behavior can I change. And usually when you do a little bit of history on where did you spend money the last 10 months, you'll have some light bulbs go off, some epiphanies saying, ooh, wow, I didn't realize I spent that much on this category. And without knowing that category and how much the money is, it's hard. I know, Brenda, you look at the church's finances, and you can look at all the different categories. When we have the financial update several times a year from Brenda, it shows us where's the by category. You don't have to have as detailed as the church, but you can at least have some big headlines to understand where is the money going. Rent or mortgage is probably going to be the number one expense that you have, right? Because you have to live somewhere, and you're either paying rent or you're paying down a mortgage. Both of those are, good things to do because you need to have a place to live. It's probably your number one category. Santa Fe is notoriously expensive, and that even though I talked about unemployment, we're in a pretty good state of unemployment in this state. Santa Fe itself, and even the outskirts of Santa Fe, is expensive for this state. So it's not a cheap place to live. And so that's just something to know that this is probably going to be the biggest cost you're going to have in your budget. And it's a choice we've all made to live here in Santa Fe. I would encourage people that are really, really tight to house hunt, find lower rent, or find a cheaper home if that is really something that's burdening you. Or renegotiate. See if you can renegotiate either a cheaper mortgage. Rates seem to be coming down a little bit, not much, but you can change the type of mortgage that you have. You might be able to negotiate, if you move to a new apartment, a different rent, maybe a few months of free rent or whatever, or you get roommates. I know when we were in New York, a lot of kids could not afford rent. Rent's outrageous in New York City. But if you ended up with 2 or 3 or 4 roommates, it may not be as comfortable, but boy, you can divide by 3 or 4 the monthly cost of utilities and the rent. So same thing here. If you can share a house, share an apartment, that does, at least temporarily, dramatically reduce the cost of rent. Mortgage, a little bit harder. You can't ask somebody, well, I guess technically you could have somebody move in, but it'd be a little strange for them to pay the mortgage. The other piece that's associated, of course, with rent or owning a house through a mortgage is utilities. Water, electricity, natural gas. I would include in that category homeowners insurance or renters insurance. Those are things you cannot not pay, right? You need to pay for internet, probably is in the same category. So those are things you have to factor in. Can you get a cheaper internet plan? Are you consuming too much water? Are you consuming too much electricity? Do you turn off the lights? Do you turn down the heating? Those types of things. Just if you know what you've been spending the last 10 months on all these utilities, you'll realize there's a lot of money that goes out there and you have to spend it, but could you do things slightly differently? Could you lower the temperature at night in your room? It's better to sleep anyway. Do you have the most expensive internet plan? Do you need that? Those are the types of things that I encourage you to look at because they're all part of that incompressible, that mandatory expenditure, which is housing. You have to live somewhere. And we have that here at the church, right? We have to pay for electricity and water. And do we have natural gas here? I don't think we have natural. We do have natural gas. So yeah, we're paying for all that, plus insurance, right? So all these things you all have, just the church has it, businesses have it. You all have those same expenses that you need to look at. And scrub those. Look at your P&M bill, look at New Mexico Gas, look at your whatever it is, NMSurf or whoever the internet provider that you have, and State Farm, whoever your insurance provider is, shop around. See if you can get something better. Or bundle, if you have car insurance with one provider and homeowners insurance with another, usually you combine them and you get multiple line item discounts. So bundle those things together and say, hey, if I move all my business to you, Mr. or Mrs. State Farm, will you give me a discount on the overall set of policies that I have? Usually they will. So look at that. Because here again, it could save you $10 a month, but that's $120 at the end of the year, and that can go right into that box at the back. The next item, after putting a roof over your head and paying for it, is usually going to be health, things you really can't compromise on. So whether it's your medical coverage you get through your employer, or if you're retired, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all these things. If you have kids, they can stay on the parents' plan till the age of 26. So, leverage that, because you're usually paying a family. If you're in a company, you're paying for a family plan. Kids can stay on until 26. Once they're 26, they're on their own. They have to get their own plans. But I encourage you to look at that as a potential savings. Do look at the plans that are offered through your employers, or if you're going through, I guess it's called the marketplace, the Obamacare, whatever is out there. Shop around. Depending on how healthy you are, what kind of coverage you need, what kind of providers you need, you can play around with this and see if you can reduce the cost of medical coverage. It's very expensive here in the United States, there's no question. Being employed and getting coverage through your employer is probably one of the most cost-efficient ways of getting it. But nonetheless, even there you have multiple plans, high deductible plans, et cetera, dental, vision. Look at those, because that's another way your money, just every paycheck leaks out. And if you're not using it, like if you're never sick and rarely go to the doctor other than like a dental checkup and a few things like that, you probably want to change your plan. Right? You still want to have coverage, but you don't want it to go out every month when you're not really getting a benefit for it. On the other hand, if you have pre-existing condition, et cetera, you want to get a plan that makes that you have very little out-of-pocket money. So I'm not an expert here, but I know this is a line item that a lot of people tend to neglect, and spend the time with your employer or whatever plan you have to understand how can I reduce the cost and still have the right coverage for my health. There's something called HSAs, health savings accounts, where you can put money aside pre-tax in anticipation of things like co-pays, or you're going to have some elective surgery or something in the coming year. You can actually pay quite a bit of that health coverage expense with pre-tax money. So ask here again your employer if they have that. Sometimes they'll put it on a credit card, and you can use that credit card when you go to CVS to pick up prescription drugs, and it's paying with pre-tax money. It's still your money. You have to put it on the card or on that account, but it allows you to do it with a more tax-efficient bucket of money. Now, some of it is use it or lose it, so you want to make sure that like put in $2,000 into that HSA account, and then you've only spent $1,000. What happens to the other $1,000? Yes, Chris. Doesn't expire. Okay. Worth a lot more. Yeah, FSA, I think FSA can be used also for, there's one of them I think you can use for other family members, not just yourself. There was, I think, a distinction between the two, but ask your employer. FSA is another good one, thanks for mentioning that.
You do have to have a high deductible health
plan.
So like only specific ones are hopefully changed.
Yeah, high deductible plans where usually that's one of the 3 or 4 plans that are offered by employers, and very often they'll give you the option of adding that HSA or FSA. When you sign up for open enrollment, which is coming up here, usually it's early November, open enrollment, where you're signing up for your benefits for 2026. Check these out. Don't just skip them. Look into them and try and understand, and go talk to HR in your company and ask them, how is this set up? Preventative care, work out. The best thing to avoid expenses on health is to be in good health to start with. So better to spend the money on joining a gym, getting a fitness trainer, buying some gym equipment, dumbbells, whatever at home, That will pay dividends because you'll be healthier and you won't be spending it at the hospital or with doctors or with the insurance companies. So that's probably the best investment you can make. So don't skimp on that. Don't cut the gym membership. Do it, but then go. Right? Don't spend it on the gym membership and not go because that's silly, but spend it and go, and you'll actually reduce potentially some of the upper parts of this expense line. Yes, Henry?
I just wanted to say, a lot of insurances cover your for gyms.
A lot of companies will incentivize you to get an Apple Watch, and they'll give you a deduction if you join some kind of fitness center, club, etc. They will. The companies want to reduce their medical expenses too. It's one of the most expensive things for a company is employee health coverage. It's not just you paying, but the companies are paying usually a lot more. And if they have healthier employees, they can actually go and negotiate lower rates. So absolutely, look into your employers if they have plans to subsidize a gym membership or get you an Apple Watch or have an annual fitness checkup. A lot of companies will do that because they want healthy employees that are productive, that come in, that don't have medical sick days, but also that reduce the overall expense for everybody. The last item I put here is long-term parental health. A lot of us may have aging parents, and they may not have the best coverage. They may not, they may run into an emergency, and how do you plan for that? And ultimately, as the son or daughter of an aging parent, it's going to probably land on you and your siblings to cover that. So anticipating it, having that conversation with them, understanding what their long-term healthcare needs may be, if they're moving into a retirement home or assisted living, et cetera, a lot of that's going to end up either you have to subsidize it or you have to use their funds and be just aware of it. So just keep that in the back of your mind, have that conversation. It's important. It does, it happens. Parents age naturally. But also have that conversation, if you're grandparents, have that conversation with your kids and your grandkids, because eventually they're going to be taking care of you. So having that conversation about what needs and wants and desires you have for your own health care, and are you covered? In other words, do they not have to worry about it? That's probably the best gift you could give, is say, you won't have to worry about my health care when I get old. But that's an important line item, and it can be very expensive with aging parents. Insurance. So this is another, if you keep kind of going down the categories of all the expenses, insurance tends to be rather expensive, especially if you want to be covered for all the bad things that could happen. You need homeowners or renters insurance. That's mandatory. Nobody's going to rent a place to you. A bank will not loan you a mortgage if you don't have insurance. So getting insurance, shop it around, see what the different terms are. There's like replacement value, there's temporary housing, there's flood insurance, there's all kinds of things, especially with the rain we've had lately. Flood insurance is relevant even in the desert. Earthquake insurance in the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, fire insurance in LA. I mean, these are very important things to consider. So make sure that is something you don't just have hitting your expense account. Go shop around. Go find, can you go from State Farm to Allstate to whoever? And here again, bundle that with car insurance and whatever other insurances you have, you'll usually get a better deal. Personal items insurance. If you have anything, whether it's a record collection, a wine collection, jewelry, bolo tie collection, whatever it is, it may not be covered by your homeowners or renters insurance. So, or if you have a piano, something of value, or a piece of art, you just want to check what is included, what's not included. Because if the house gets flooded or burns down or somebody steals it, you want to make sure that that item is covered. And sometimes that's a separate policy. So just double check in your policy what is in there and what's excluded, because they will exclude things like, I don't know, if you inherited some silverware from a grandparent, silverware may not be covered. And if the house burns and it melts, and they'll say, sorry, that wasn't covered. So here again, something to go check and see if it's important. It's not mandatory, but it's just an interesting thing to add to the list of things to consider. Auto insurance, if you have a car, you better have insurance. If you don't, not a good thing. Here again, shop around. If you have multiple cars, if you're a good driver, all these things, being a good driver, having a good driver track record will reduce your auto insurance. Yes, Dennis?
One, maybe Joanna, help with that, but make sure that with our industry, with crash investigation and claims and stuff, it's important that you get your insurance stacked, so you have uninsured motorists matching your coverage.
Yeah.
Because insurance companies will
Mhm.
So your coverage for your policy matches your uninsured motorist. They're the same. So that way you're fully
Yep.
covered. And also check to see how much you can pay. A lot of people only have $25,000 insurance, and that usually doesn't cover you if you're in an accident. But if you go up a little bit, it could only be like $5 more, or you can even jump up quite a bit and surprisingly pay much less than what you pay.
Yeah, and so understanding the policies, what's covered, the uninsured motorist, so somebody else crashes into you and they don't have insurance, maybe don't even have a valid license, and they have, if you're not covered, your car's totaled, maybe you're injured, you need to make sure you have the proper coverage given whatever work-related, driving you do or just driving around. And New Mexico is infamous for not being the greatest driving state, apparently. So this is, to your point, Dennis, and I know you're in the business, this is a fairly frequent occurrence. And if you have auto insurance, make sure you're covered for the right things. Getting a replacement car, making sure if the other person is uninsured, you have something to go after, so at least you're not out of pocket on this.
Medical coverage goes with that too. If you're injured in the accident, you're not gonna have enough money to pay bills and you're gonna get stuck paying your own bills.
Absolutely. Yep.
Can I just
Yep, go ahead.
add to that, 'cause it's so important.
Yep.
And the average Joe doesn't know this, and we do this all day long in my personal injury loan payout firm. If you have 4 vehicles and you don't stack them, only 1 car will be available for that underinsured motorist coverage. But if you only have 2550 and you stack them, that's $100,000 available to you. And I think agents don't explain that. And I can't tell you how many clients come and say, oh, I'm fully covered. You're not. You have no medical payments coverage. You have no, I mean, it's just, they don't understand it because it's not their world.
And usually the language is pretty complicated, so I encourage you to sit down, ask them, even if it feels like a dumb question, ask, right?
And one more thought, medical payments coverage is a good thing to have even if you have health insurance. There's no copay. I can literally walk from a car accident scene of my own to my chiropractor. You don't have to get, jump through hurdles. So really pay attention. It breaks my heart.
Yeah.
I have to tell people, don't have a whole lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so definitely use, Joanne, but talk to people who know this space. Insurance is important. It's a good thing to have in many cases. You don't have to have all of these, but if you don't have them and something bad happens, it'll wipe you out financially, not to mention physically, medically, et cetera, et cetera. Umbrella insurance is another type of insurance. That's if somebody sues you, somebody slips on your front doorstep, or something bad happens and they go after you, you're covered. And so I encourage you to ask. It's called umbrella insurance. I encourage you to go see what that might be and what kind of coverage that could offer you. Here again, it's another line item. It's a little bit out of pocket, but if you add all these up and go to State Farm and say, here, I'm going to give you all this, they'll give you a better rate. So you don't have to have umbrella insurance, but at least ask the question. What does it cover if something bad were to happen at your workplace, or somebody decides they want to sue you because something fell on their head outside your house? What do you do? The last one here, a little different category, life insurance. Now you can't pay to be resurrected. That doesn't work. But life insurance is actually more of an investment, and it's really for the people left, after your untimely death, left for them to, if you're the main breadwinner, how do you make sure your spouse can pay off the house and live comfortably? And so I encourage you to also look at life insurance. There are different types, whole life and term life, complicated words. But go find out, is that something you should have, particularly if there's a single major breadwinner in the home? How do you make sure your spouse and kids, but mainly your spouse, can survive financially if you were to disappear suddenly? And a lot of this has to do with how healthy you are, how early you start life insurance policies. There's some take-home value. When it expires, you actually have some money back, so it's kind of an investment. Some just expire, but at least you had the coverage. So if you do die, boom, and you can get fairly large policies for a very little amount every month if you start early enough and you're in good health. So that's it. Here again, another thing to talk about, State Farm. We had life insurance with State Farm. A lot of these firms, Allstate, all these, they will, Aflac, all these whatever companies, they have virtually all these products. Go sit down with an insurance broker and ask them, tell me everything you can offer, tell me what the costs are, what the benefits are. But this is an important part of life planning. If you don't have insurance, something bad happens, it can wipe you out. financially. And if something bad happens, like you die, how do you make sure, how do you have that peace of mind that your spouse can survive, and even without the income that you provided, they can pay off the home. They can live off of the money that's left. So an important category. Budget. Let's talk a little bit about what a budget could look like. And this is part of your homework, maybe not by next Sunday, but over the course of the next few weeks. Make a budget. So look at what you spent the last 10 months. Like just get an Excel spreadsheet or a piece of paper, whatever, and start writing it down. And the 50-30-20 math is kind of a little simplistic, but you're going to have these incompressible expenses, these needs. I have to put a roof over my head. I have to buy food. I have to get gas. The insurance we talked about. That's probably going to end up being about 50% of what you spend, including taxes, tithing, etc. So look at how much money you're making, and probably about 50% is going to go towards these must-pay needs of expenses. And then you have the wants category, which is maybe 30%. So that's going out to dinner once a week, or going out to see a movie, or buying new clothing, or whatever that might be. But the most important category here is what's left over is savings. And if you spend everything, you have no savings, which means you have no retirement, you have nothing to plan for kids' college, et cetera, et cetera. So at a minimum, are you putting 20% of what you make aside? Through various things. It can be IRAs, 401ks, regular savings accounts, et cetera, et cetera. But are you saving anything? And if you aren't, you either have to change the top line, so get a job that pays more or get a second job. But if you're already maxed out there, then you have to change the expenses. Because you have to squeeze out from that difference between income and expenses, what's left over is savings. In a company, that's called profit, right? And if you don't have profit, at some point you're going to run out of cash and go out of business. Same thing here. If you don't save, you're either going to dig a hole that you can't get out of, or you just won't have a retirement. You won't have that rainy day fund. So I encourage you to just sit down, and the math doesn't have to be 100% precise. It's not like within $1, round it to the closest, $25, $100, whatever the math is for what you've spent the last 10 months. But please, 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 I urge you to do that in the coming weeks. Find out where did you spend your money? Where did it go? Pull out your credit card statements, your bank statements. If you pulled out cash, try and keep a track of, where that cash went, so you at least know where the money's going. And do you have a positive leftover called savings, or are you burning more than you should? So that's the homework. And then once you know what you've done the last 10 months, build a budget for next year and start saying, well, I have to pull this down, I have to constrain this, and then you track it and make sure you're staying on budget. Not saying I made a budget and then I tossed it out the window and went off and spent like I felt like it. You have to have a budget and then stick to it, and every month you track, am I still on my monthly budget? Right? Now, some things will be seasonal. Maybe you have more expenses in the summer because you're going on vacation, or more expenses around Christmas to buy gifts for people, or certain expenses hit at certain times of the year. But there should be kind of an average expense rate throughout the 12 months of the year. So build that budget for 2026 off of what you've spent in 2025. Divide the annual budget by 12, and you know what your monthly budget is, and hold yourself to it. But absolutely plan now. It's middle of October. Do it over the course of the next month, and you'll feel good about being on top of what you spent in 25, and you'll have a plan for 2026. So 50, 30, 20. And if the savings part isn't 20, then you have some homework to do. You have to try and find a way to get at least to 20% of what's coming in to go off to savings. Any questions on expenses? We're good? Okay, I will go to debt. That's a part of the expense category, but a slightly different grouping. Debt is usually when you can't afford something and you have to borrow money. So when the expenses kind of outpace your income, living above your means. Not always, but bad debt usually is when you're living above your means. But there's good debt. There's different types of debt. Now here again, I'm simplifying, but usually good debt, I would put mortgage in that category. Now if you bought too big of a house, can't afford it, that's bad mortgage. But if you bought a house and it's increasing in value and you're building equity and you can raise your family there, and you're paying off the mortgage and there's some tax deductibility of the interest on occasion, that's usually good debt because you're building equity. At some point you might sell that house and pay off the mortgage, and whatever extra you made, you grew the equity in the home. Well, that was a good investment because you have a return on that. You have to get the right mortgage at the right rates with the right terms. You don't want a mortgage that goes through the roof when interest rates go through the roof. But usually mortgage is a good place to incur debt. What I call potentially neutral debt would be student debt and car loans. And I'll mention student debt. If to go to college you have to borrow money, and maybe you get a scholarship, but you still have to borrow some money to go to college, and colleges are notoriously expensive. Even state colleges are very expensive. In-state a little bit less, but out-of-state definitely expensive. But if you get a degree that gets you a job that earns good money, that you can pay off the debt, that is a good investment. If you get a degree that leads nowhere and you still have $40,000 in student debt and you have no way of paying it back, you're going to drag that along till you're close to retirement. So student debt, don't go to a college you can't afford, but go to the best college you can. And if you have to incur debt on that, then find a way to either work while the kid is in college, and certainly if you have college debt once you start working, make a plan to pay it off. Because there's very little benefit to dragging that on for the next 20, 30 years, although the interest rates tend to be low. It's just dangling over your head, and it does impact your credit score. Car debt. We all need, almost everybody needs a car. Sometimes you have to borrow to buy a car. Fine, but you don't have to get the Ferrari. Right? You don't have to get the Porsche. Well, sorry, Mike, yeah. If you're retired, you can get the Ferrari, you can do whatever you want. But making sure here again, don't buy above your means. Can you afford that monthly payment? And you can lease a car, which has its benefits, or you can buy a car. But if you have car debt, interest rates tend to be pretty low, around 5% these days for most car loans, but eventually you want to pay it off. Right? So there again, these are kind of neutral, depends on did you overbuy, right? Or did you over-indebt yourself to go to college, or did you buy a crazy car that you probably shouldn't have? Can you afford those things? Then in those cases, I would consider that to be neutral, to maybe good debt, because it allows you to go to work and bring your kids to school and go around, or get a good education. The bad debt, that's credit card debt. So that's definitely where you're living above your means. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between debit cards and credit cards. Sometimes the language is a little confusing, but if you have credit card debt and you're not paying down the entire balance every month, then you're incurring outrageous interest. They'll lure you in with 0%. They'll say, 0% APR, for 6 months. It's great, so it's free money. But then they hit you with 24.5%. And that's what you're playing catch up with. So if you do have credit card debt, you need a plan now to start paying it down. It's like start paying down the principal so you bring it down to 0, and then you use your credit card like you do a debit card, which means you incur no interest on it. But it's just very convenient because you can buy stuff, but you have to pay it down every single month. This is just good discipline, good budgetary discipline, is don't incur credit card debt with outrageous percentages, because you can't write that off. They're taking you to the cleaners with that 24% debt. And you'll see it in the fine print if you get those credit card offers in the mail, like we all do. It usually says 0%. You're like, oh, that's cool, that's free. Go read the fine print. It'll tell you after 6 months it goes to usually 24 plus or 27 or something ridiculous. So, yeah. Yeah, some of the credit cards have great things. You can get all the miles you want. Just don't let that outpace your income. And if you have it now, have a plan to pay it down. And I would challenge you, 3 months or 6 months, get rid of credit card debt. Find a way to tighten the belt, stop spending on other things. But that is the big kind of money sink is credit card debt. Because it adds no value, you're living above your means, and it just dangles above your head. And they're just going to keep ratcheting. 24% is insane, right? But that's how they make money, is people paying late or not paying, and they just ratchet up, and then you're playing big catch up. So better to tighten the belt and catch up in 6 months, and just get rid, if not sooner, just get rid of it. It is biblical to pay off your debts. Right? Now, they had the year of Jubilee and all the debts were wiped out. That doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately. But wiping out debt is one of the greatest things you can do for your own personal financial health. And whether you owe money to friends, you want to keep them as friends and not as people that you're indebted to. So pay them off if you owe them money. And don't forget if you borrowed, a little bit of money from them. You have to pay off the bank when it comes to mortgage. You have to pay off colleges when it comes to school. You want to get rid of that debt. Now, mortgages you might keep longer just because you have a 30-year mortgage on a home, and that's fine. But hopefully after 30 years, you've paid it off and the home is yours. Or you've sold the house and you've made some money and you can move to a smaller house and downsize. But paying off your debts is biblical. Incurring debt and not paying it off, I would argue, is not biblical. You should find a way to pay back people you owe money to. And find a way. And there are many ways, and some of it involves sacrifice, and does not mean you can't tithe. So that's not an excuse. Just because you have debt doesn't mean you shouldn't be giving back to God. Remember the number 2 item, income. Number 2 is tithing. Then you pay down things. But you don't say, I have to pay down my debt, so therefore I can't tithe. Well, Pastor Frank doesn't care about your debt. Right? God's work doesn't wait for your debt. So making sure that you pay down that debt and those credit card fees as quickly as possible. I thought this was kind of funny, student debt. Once you've already sold your non-vital organs, what else do you have left to pay off your student debt? But student debt is crushing a lot of people that went to schools they couldn't afford or found outcomes and jobs that really didn't pay very well. For those of you who have kids that are about to go to college, make sure that they're planning for this and that you're planning for the right schools at the right tuition level that everyone can afford. And if there is student debt, can they get scholarships with their Wicked Smart? That's a better way to incur student debt, is get a scholarship, pays off for at least some of the college tuition, and then lower debt that you can then pay off, hopefully once you start in the workplace. But this is important, especially if you start projecting where college will be cost-wise in 20 years. Yeah, I've got 1 more minute. I will end. Thank you. I will end on this. Education is usually correlated with income, whether it's a vocational school, college degree, et cetera, et cetera. If you get an education and develop skills, your potential to make money over the lifetime is dramatically changed. So send kids to school, good schools. Homeschooling is great, but at some point they're probably not going to be homeschooled after high school, certainly. But making sure that people get an education that can lead to higher income, because with higher income you can tithe more and you can, take care of your personal finances. So getting an education and encouraging people to get a good education and finding the right balance between the cost of that education and the potential outcomes is important. So for those of you who have kids that are coming up to college age or grandkids that are coming up to college age, think about that's an investment in their financial future, is making sure that they have earning potential and not too much debt that comes out of it. So with that, I'll end today's session. Thanks, Mike, for the hook. Tune in next Sunday for part 3. Dennis, that's for you.